Every camera I have owned has shaped how I see the streets. One made me want to learn more. One made me see the streets differently. And one made me embrace the imperfection and trust the process. This isn't a gear list. It's a story about my personal journey, the creative shift that happened, told through the cameras I've used for street photography. So let's talk about it. I've had many different cameras for street photography over the years, everything from old SLR, DSLR, point and shoot from the 90s, crop sensor, full frame, and micro four thirds. I have 3 different cameras that I use for street photography, but which one is my favorite? So in today's video, I like to break down why I bought the camera, how I use it, and what type of photograph I can make with it. Alright, up first is my Sony a7C Mark I that I bought back in 2021, and I bought that camera because of a much needed upgrade from my Canon 800D. And I had my Canon 800D for many years and I learned all my street photography on it and I just loved that camera. But the upgrade with the Sony a7C, it also gave me an opportunity to hone and really elevate my street photography skills even more. Buying a full frame camera was a good option for me. I think it was released back in 2020. Back then, I believe it was the first full-frame camera in such a compact and small camera body, and that really appealed to me. Even though the camera was a little bit out of my budget, I thought it would be a good investment just to have it and learn my street photography on it from now on. And here we are, and I still got it. But the way I use this camera is much different than I did back in 2021. Since I bought the camera, I invested a lot in the Sony brand and also the ecosystem. I would say I have a fairly large lens collection. I own all the classic focal lengths. So I started with the 35 and then I bought the 55, 85, and then recently I added the 40mm. And I also, in between that, I also bought the 24 because I do really like architecture street photography. And it's not the best for street photography, but yeah, now it has a completely different purpose, but I'll talk about it in a bit. With the Sony a7C, the main purpose was to do street photography, and that's also the reason I bought it, because that was the only camera I had. Back then, I was really obsessing about night street photography, and that is also the reason I have all these fast prime lenses, because they are really good for low light situation like night street photography. So the main use and the photographs I typically made between 2021 and 2023 was basically mastering light and shadow, high contrast photographs, and night street photography where there's a lot of contrast between light and shadow, where you can really enhance a subject. Silhouette photography. So those were kind of my signature photographs that I made with that camera back then. And with my Sony a7C, I also do a bit more stylized photographs if I want to do a bit more minimalistic type of photographs. But yeah, basically anything I could do. I also did portrait photography later. I learned flash photography with that camera because it's so versatile. But my main use was street photography. Back in 2023, I think there was a twofold shift that happened where the Sony a7C kind of shifted from being my main street photography camera to not being the main camera any longer. And the first one is that I got a new camera, which is the next camera I'll be talking about, the Fuji X100V. And the other thing was my YouTube channel. So the Sony a7C naturally became my workhorse camera that I used to record these videos, make B-roll, because I have so many different lenses, and that is really good when you're creating B-roll as well. So the shift happened quite naturally because I used it as a multi-purpose tool. But long story short, I would say I still use my Sony a7C occasionally for street photography. Maybe it's 90% content creation and 10% street photography when I really wanted to do something stylized, or if I want to take my 85 out for a spin, I use my Sony a7C. This is the camera that changed my street photography forever. This is the Fuji X100V that I bought back in the summer of 2023. I talked about it a lot on the channel that I went from having a lot of mixed feeling. I didn't like the camera. I thought it was a bad decision to buy it because, again, I got caught up in the hype of this camera, which was outrageous back in the summer of 2023. And a couple of months later, the Mark VI dropped. So I was like, I should get rid of it. But recently I made a video about this camera where I talk about not liking it to really loving it. So that was the reason why I bought this camera, because of the hype, and I got caught up in it, and I learned from that mistake ever since. But luckily I grew to love this camera. So let's talk about how I use this camera for street photography. Let me give you a quick rundown. So this camera has a crop sensor and it is 26.1 megapixel, I think. Basically a glorified point and shoot, and I'm not being very generous here, but it has everything you could ever want. It has a flash, it has a internal ND filter, it's very lightweight and it's very compact. And yeah, it's everything you could want. And it also have film simulations, which is the main thing why people buy the Fuji cameras. Aside from they're really well made and just awesome. So the reason why I said this camera changed my street photography forever is because it literally did. I went from using those tighter focal lengths like the 85, 55, and being really content with using those because you are at a more safer distance, to being forced to use the 35mm all over again. And to be honest, I never cared for that focal length and it took me a long time to get used to it. So that was the main reasons why I think I kind of disliked the camera in the beginning, and it was basically my own fault that I bought it because I know for myself that I like the longer focal lengths. And I actually ended up buying a conversion lens for it, so you put it on top of the lens here. And I bought the 28mm. That was a complete game changer. I also talked about it on some of my vlog episodes. You can check it out in the description below. But that was really a game changer because when you have a 28 or you have a 35, it means that you have to be really close to your subjects. And that was also part of a challenge that I gave myself, that I wanted to be closer to my subjects, because with the longer focal lengths, as I mentioned before, you are more in a safer distance away from people and your subjects, and you can comfortably take a photo. I felt like I had a need to get closer to my subjects. Also, I wanted to push myself to experience a different kind of street photography. I kept at it for a few months because the challenge was a couple of months long. It was really hard because when you get that close to your subject, or at least I did, I started to hesitate a lot. Because when you are 1.5 or 2 meters away, you are actually really close and people will notice what you're doing. I found ways to take photographs that was not available to me with my a little bit bigger Sony a7C. Even though it's a small camera, you know, the footprint is not that big. But this camera is just very stealthy, it's very lightweight, and basically I can just hide it instantly after I take a photograph. Yeah, so that's kind of how I started on my challenge and tried to get closer to my subjects until I got more comfortable and found a routine, a way, a style of holding the camera. And also I would say this camera has truly become my true EDC. So everyday carry, I just throw it in my bag and I bring it everywhere. And the few times I don't bring it, I really regret it because I just see something I wanted to take a photograph of. Just such an amazing feeling when you have your camera with you and you just quickly can snap a photo. So for me, that is the essence of doing street photography, just trying to capture the moment that is there for a split second. So the pictures I make with this camera are vastly different. As I mentioned, I use the zone focus, which is not a true zone focus because this just keeps spinning. So the distance scale is not true as a Leica. It gets the job done. It's a very good way for me not to worry about autofocus because it's pre-focused anyway. Another thing is I have it on the JPEG and RAW setting, and 95% of the time I only edit the JPEGs. I have the RAW file as a backup. I want to have a RAW file that I have a little bit more leverage in when I'm post-processing. So that's the reason why I had that set up. So every time I pick up this camera, I know exactly what the setup is, and that's why it's so easy just to use this camera. This is my latest addition to my camera collection. So this is the Leica M6, and it's not a digital camera, it's a film camera. I wanted a film camera and I wanted to go back to film photography for the longest time. I think this camera has been on my wish list for the last 3 years and seriously for the last 2. And each time I kept putting it off because of the expense surrounding just buying a Leica and also the associated film cost. I would say you have to have a bank account to go with this very expensive hobby. Since I bought this camera, I would say I've completely fallen in love with street photography all over again. The experience is so different with this camera, you know, contra my Fuji X100V or even before that, the Sony a7C. And the reason for that is because this camera is just so simple. It's a bare bones camera. So basically you have to master exposure triangle. You have to learn to master the Sunny 16 in terms of light conditions to expose the photo correctly. So basically it's almost like going back to the roots of taking a photo and learning photography all over again. It's been such a pleasure. And I can also mention I have a Voigtlander or a Vogtländer. I had German for 6 years in school, so I think it's how it's pronounced correctly. It's a 28mm, which is the ultimate street photography focal length, in my opinion. So it's manual focus. I love everything about it. It's a very slow process. I'm one of those people who take a photograph and I instantly look at the LCD to see and review my photograph, because with digital, you can just retake a shot if it's not a fleeting moment. But with this camera, you actually don't know until you get your roll developed. And to be honest, and also to my surprise, I really like that slow process and just having that gratification when you get your roll developed and you get your scans back. For me, it's been absolutely amazing, and I'm so happy I bought this camera. Forgot to mention, but this camera's sole purpose is street photography, and I got my dream focal length, which is such a weird thing for me to say, that the 28mm is my dream focal length now. It used to be the 85 and 55. It's amazing how much street photography can change just over the course of a few years. That's why I really do love it. Alright, so I talked about all my different cameras and why I bought them, how I use them, and what type of photographs that I typically make with the different cameras. Now it's time to talk about which one is my favorite. So you're probably thinking it's going to be the Leica M6, which is a natural thing because I just called it the ultimate street photography camera. But in my opinion, this camera is just one part of it. I would say it's a combination between the Fuji X100V and the Leica M6 in my kit, because both of them just complement each other so much. And I'm not going to be an exclusive film photographer. Right now, I do really enjoy digital photography as well. So for me, having the Fuji X100V, which is very similar to this Leica camera, so the experience is, in terms of handling the camera, they're both lightweight. They even look the same, but the experience of, how to shoot and the whole process around, taking it slow versus it's digital, faster gratification, where it's slower process with the Leica. I like both of those things. I get best of both worlds, and I get a need kind of covered in terms of having film on those days where I'm in a mood to do film photography, take things slower, and sometimes I'm really in a mood for my Fuji X100V, just put on a film simulation, just go out and just snap different photos, instead of being a little bit mindful with this camera where I have to be but careful in terms of what I'm taking a photograph of, because every time I press the shutter, it costs money. And even though I'm trying not to think about click equals money, it's always there in the back of my mind. And with digital camera, which is also their true strength, is that you can take a lot of photographs, you can retake a photo, you can see what you're taking a photo of, and also course correct if you want to do that. I would say it's a combination, and both of those cameras are my favorites. And that leaves out the Sony A7C, but I also talked about I don't use it for street photography that much any longer. It served me well all these years also for street photography, and I learned a lot of things in addition to my Canon 800D, so it definitely took my level from here to up here. And now I think it's a different kind of experience and a different kind of exploration of street photography that I'm seeking and really enjoying. But I would say that Fuji and the Leica has really brought the joy back for me for street photography. All right, I'll see you in the next one.